Welcome to my video on the 1990 movie Edward Scissorhands. I'm gonna start with a review that's gonna have zero spoilers for this or anything else, and then get into what I call the thoughts section, where I do a spoiler discussion of this movie, but I'm not spoiling any other piece of media. So, unless I forget to, I plan on making this video public on Christmas Eve. So whether you practice any kind of religion or not, perhaps you're a nun, N-O-N-E, like myself, if you at all treasure the holidays, then I sincerely wish you happy holidays. And right now this is about as close to a Christmas movie as I get on Christmas. You don't have to tell me, it's not like, I'm aware that there are other Christmas movies that are significantly Christmasier than this. Honestly, I really hate the idea of someone finding my channel hostile to them if they don't like Christmas. Personally, it has sentimental value to myself, even though I don't believe. And yeah, I guess I'll yeah, so before I go too much further, I wanted to make sure to note the movie is rated PG-13, so will this video be. And this is one of those movies, for a long time I pretty much had no negatives to say about, and now, it's a guilty pleasure. I can't really not love this movie. I can just also, I'm gonna do my best to explore the various issues that it has. It has been a little while since I watched it, I guess. Wow, I might not have watched it since she first uploaded it, but if you haven't already, Maggie Mayfish did at least one really excellent video on Tim Burton, where she, among other of his movies, talked about this one. If I recall, it does spoil at least some of them, so just be aware of that. But yeah, excellent video, as hers, are. And yes, I want to make sure to note, so some of the things I'm going to be discussing in this video, I am not a member of the communities that are affected by those issues. I base my analysis on what I've heard, left-leaning members of those communities say. In the description box, there is a link to a Google Doc where I have a bunch of the various minorities that I listen to for, better understanding, empathizing with the issues faced by their communities. I'm not trying to white-splain, mansplain, any such, yeah. Yeah, I make videos like this in part because I know there are a number of cishet white men who refuse to listen to minorities, and I hope eventually they will. And in the meantime, I can, maybe they'll listen to me. I look and sound like them. So yeah, please do not let me be the only source of analysis for minority communities and the issues they face. Yeah, I guess so a little bit more preamble, and then we're gonna get into it. So Tim Burton, is a director that I used to have very little criticism of, and then I became more aware of some of the messed up things, which again, among others, Maggie Mae Fish has done really solid. Let's see if I can remember. I want to say Haryana Hook was one of them as well. Yes, so, and obviously you also have Johnny Depp, who I really just hope that he gets to a place where he's willing to admit that he's hurting people and gets help and stops. I'm not saying that he should automatically be able to do it without getting help, but he has, he can get that help. But the times I've seen where it comes up, it seems like he's just too stubborn to admit that he has a problem, and this has been going on for decades. So I am not making this video in order to exonerate Burton or Depp. Right now, I'm honestly not entirely sure. It's been a while. Let's see. I guess I think the very last. Oh wait, yeah. Let's see. Okay, so I watched the Dumbo remake. Yeah, that was the last time I saw a Burton movie. I think the last Depp movie might have been the. Wait, was he in? Oh, right. The I guess the second of the of the live action Alice in Wonderland movies. And I'm not entirely sure that I'm gonna watch anything new of theirs. I'm trying to figure out if I'm gonna do more videos on stuff they've made that I have already watched. I think it's definitely only gonna be the case if I feel like I can criticize some of the aspects that they there's stuff that I feel should be criticized, such as the case with this one. Yes, I will just briefly note, so when it comes to Tim Burton, the ones I've watched of his, other than this, so Sleepy Hollow, Sweeney Todd, Alice in Wonderland, the Batman movies, the let's see, what's it called again? Beetlejuice, the first one. I feel like there's at least one more, but I can't quite place it right now. Maybe those are all of them. Some of his early shorts, such as Frankenweenie. Yeah, that might. Oh, Mars Attacks. And yeah, I guess I pretty much already said that. Yeah, I mean, Dark something or other. Oh, right. For those who don't know, my wrists are too sore to look stuff up right now, so it's gonna have to be from memory and such. Right, and I did literally just finish rewatching the movie, so that is very fresh in my mind, such as it is. But the Dark something or other, the one where, Depp, Michelle Pfeiffer, Jackie Earle Haley, Chloe Moretz are the actors that I remember. Oh, and Ava Green, obviously, who absolutely steals the show. She was like so unbelievably good in the, so other than that, there's the second Sin City and the second 300. It might just be a good, there were a couple of years there where it was really good if she appeared in the sequel to an adaptation of a Frank Miller comic book, or in the case of Dark, I want to say it's called, that's a soap opera, I'm pretty sure. I haven't watched the original show, only the the movie adaptation. Anyway, yeah. Yes, briefly noting, at the time, I, thought higher than I should have of the Dark something or other. Dark Shadows, is that what it's called, I think. Today I'm willing to admit it's not really, it is, yeah. Ice cold take, Tim Burton is not, at some point he kind of is, yeah, he stopped being as good. Maybe he's come back. I don't know. Like I said, haven't watched his most recent, but 80's and 90's he made some real strong ones. Oh, actually, Sweeney Todd might be the most recent of his that I just 100% loved. Yeah, the Alice in Wonderland one I did not think very highly of. Yes. So the I guess I'll just briefly note. So I'm aware that there are some people who try to make this. There are people who, when criticizing this, don't acknowledge that it is a fairy tale. It's a gothic fairy tale, and so they try to like apply some real world logic to it that really kind of just makes them look silly. Like, listen, if you're not into comic books, that too, but if you're not into fairy tales, that's fine. Like, I hope nobody's, pressuring you into, watching, reading, etc., and reviewing and such. Yeah, like, that was actually one of the problems with the Alice in Wonderland thing. It was trying to apply logic to this. Like, the original animated is fantastic, and a big part of the appeal is how much it is willing to be absurd. It is so, like, yeah, well, I guess by now it's maybe a year since I last watched it, but yeah, it's fantastic. So yeah, this video, I am not going to be saying, well, that wouldn't really happen in the real world. No, of course it wouldn't. That's not the point. And yeah, I think that is the entire preamble. So, gonna start with the writing. I forget who, but a fellow leftist YouTuber already pointed out the screenplays for Tim Burton movies are not necessarily, that's not really why. Okay, you know what? From here on out, when I say a Tim Burton movie, I mean for the period that, some of his earliest stuff, and I've said the ones I've watched. I've given you an idea of when I stopped watching him. So yeah, I cannot comment on if it has changed in recent years. But yeah, classic Tim Burton. It's really more the visuals, the style, the way it makes you feel more than the screenplay. And yeah, this one is not necessarily an exception. Now remember, Anthony Gramuglia was definitely someone I wanted to point out. He did at least one video talking about, I think it was something along the lines of what happened to Tim Burton. And yeah, he talks about. So I'm not, and he does a discussion where he spoils several of the movies, which, as mentioned, I'm not going to be doing. So make sure you watch his video. But basically, anything he said that I'm not saying the opposite of, assume that I either do agree or likely would. If maybe he's talking about a movie that I haven't watched of Burton's. But moving on, the yes, I think that pretty much brings us to, yes. So one thing that... So I'm keeping this very... Yeah, the review itself is spoiler-free, so I will just say there are aspects of this where you can really tell this was a fairly personal story for Burton, and it gets a lot out of that. You know, it's one of those things where Burton has fascinations, and I've heard him himself say, you know, there are things that he doesn't necessarily really understand, and he might still put them in one of his movies. You know, if he thinks something is silly, he'll make fun of it in one of his movies. And this is one of those cases where that works the best because it is coming from such an honest place. It doesn't feel like he's just... I can appreciate... some might say that it feels petty. I don't really agree, but I can understand where they're coming from. Oh, and obviously, yeah, right. There's so many things to get to. I do not ascribe to auteur theory, so when I say Burton, I'm not saying that he alone did all of this. And I definitely think the fact that he did not... Let's see. I forget if he didn't write the screenplay. He's credited with writing the story. I think the screenplay was written by he had a woman do that, Susanna something. And yeah, you can definitely tell that that's again, sometimes his ideas need to be developed by others. But yeah, it's clearly coming from a very real place, and there's I guess that might be about as much as I can say of that without spoiling anything. One of the themes of Tim Burton's work is contrasting the weird, which he feels drawn towards, with the... See, I'm not sure if normal is necessarily the word, but what is considered normal, which he clearly finds boring at best and downright, deeply off-putting at worst. And that's, again, this is one of the ones where I feel like that works the best. I think... Yeah, I think we're gonna move on to the next. So it's one of those things where the elevator pitch is really a Rorschach test for some of the people who ended up working on it, have expressed that when they first heard of the concept or read the script or the like, they were like, what is this? And they ended up working on it and doing really, really impressive work. If you are immediately 100% deterred from, engaging with this based on the elevator pitch, which right now I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to give in the spoiler-free review itself, but it's very easy to find out. The movie was never going to be your kind of thing, and I do really appreciate it doesn't feel like it's toned down. And in some ways that is slightly to its detriment, but it is very much the movie that Tim Burton wanted to make. And that's also one of the things that happened to him was definitely that he, I was just about to say it, and I realized, you know what, I would basically just be saying what Anthony Gramuglia, or Ant, did. So yeah, you can watch his too. But the to get that analysis, yeah, I think that pretty much. So the psychological accuracy is a lot of the time very high. It manages to strike a balance between, as mentioned, a fairy tale and something that does feel more true to, and that's one area where I do 100% understand people who don't love fairy tales. And it's, for me, I kind of need to be in the right frame of mind for it. I worry that I have maybe in the past done videos where I did, and I regret that, where I did try to apply real world logic. And perhaps I could say, well, some of those videos were made back when other people were doing that as well. I still regret it. I should have taken them on their own terms instead. But yeah, it has some psychological aspects that you would not find in a fairy tale from, 100 or more years ago. And I think that does... Right, and I guess I'll just briefly note. So one of the ways that we get the fairy tale element is that at the very start of this, we actually get a framing device. This entire movie is a story being told by one person to another person. And that immediately has us, thinking, is it completely, yeah, was this really what happened, or is that, and one of the things is who it's being told to. And yeah. So let's see, yes, and it's also one of the things here is the suburbs are which, Tim Burton grew up in the suburbs and felt very out of place there. And he, because of that, has, or at least when he made this, had a strained relationship with the, and it's one of those things. I think those are some of the best stories about the suburbs, are people who don't completely love them, but have things to say about them, not just screw this. And I really appreciated how many different aspects of the suburbs they managed to fit in without it feeling overstuffed. We meet a number of different people who live there and see how they, the different ways that they, and I think that does bring us to this. So as far as authenticity goes, in some ways this is authentic to what I understand the suburbs to be. I have never, and probably never will, live there. But the, other than that, it is definitely, for at least most of it, it stays very true to itself. And it's one of those things where it should, I'm starting to repeat myself, moving on. The level of detail is great. They really made sure to think of a lot of different things that they could put in there. And that's, the world building can sometimes be really, really great in Burton's movies. And the tone, it's not the exact same throughout the entire thing, but it, in my opinion, doesn't really feel like it betrays itself. Like when it varies and grows and develops, it feels earned. And I think that, yeah, the dialogue is very nicely done. There is a good amount of individual characters having their own unique voices that is very based on who they are, where they are at that point in their lives, whether or not they're happy with that, and, things like that. And yeah, it's very much a case of, there's a lot of lines here that you really couldn't take out of the mouth of the person saying it and give to any other character and for it to still make sense. Like, we would immediately be like, that's not what that character sounds like. Yeah, so the direction, it really does engage the viewer emotionally from right away. Like, we are... I mean, this movie is like 100 minutes. And I honestly, I would have guessed that it was longer because I remembered nearly everything in it. I would have thought it was 20 or 30 minutes longer, but some of it they just managed to get across without spending very much time on it. And yeah, like, genuinely really, really well done on that. And it also manages to, that's another thing, when the thing with personal stories is it can be a little bit of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it can, the authenticity of it can really add a lot to it, but it can also end up feeling like someone is basically kind of justifying something they have done or said, or that sort of thing, maybe making excuses, maybe painting someone they knew as worse than they were, that sort of thing. And again, it doesn't really feel like that because it is so obviously, like, not quite supposed to be taken at face value. It feels like the story is being told by one particular character in this a while after they experienced it, and it's sort of there's some element of, that's probably not how it really happened, but that's what it felt like, And sometimes that is the exact right way to tell the story. And yeah, the plot is, and emotional engagement are handled well. It doesn't take very long to get going, and yet it knows when to, it's paced very well. And I think that does bring us to, cinematography and editing are some of the strongest aspects of this, and in general, if you're watching a good Tim Burton movie, that's very frequently the case. That was always one of the things I most returned to his work for. And yeah, just the suburbs. I read that they actually didn't have to change that much about at least some of the houses. Basically, like, the kind of garish paint on there, that's what they had to change to suit the movie. And I do think that is very telling. It really did not take all that much to make it look genuinely like do people really choose to live in places like this? Like yeah. And some of that is the camera work, and the color does definitely, uh, well, color our perception of it. And they did such a fantastic job there. It's these kind of, I want to say the word is pastels, that are just like, they strike this really great balance of being an eyesore to the audience who sympathize with this idea of suburbs, really? We want to go there? And at the same time feeling like, you know, well, I don't know, I guess I could picture the way that the tone is handled here and the people that we meet. Yeah, I could buy that they would live here. And yeah, there's one particular thing in editing that I don't think I'm going to give away. Yeah, I'll discuss it in the spoiler section, but there is at least one bit where they made a very smart decision. I'm not certain if it was on the script level or if it was when they were cutting it, but yeah. And the production value is very high. Nothing feels cheap. And yeah, throughout, like, you feel like you're looking at something that is actually really there, which, considering some of the things, is impressive. And yeah, set design, locations, costumes, and makeup are all on point and help communicate a lot about the various characters. You know, how does this or that character decorate their home? You know, what is the, you know, if someone goes to, there are places visited where we get a strong sense of the people who chose to make it look like that. And yeah, costumes is also really one of those places where, like, there's some of the costume work here where, like, we look at it and it's like, is that really what someone would wear? But it absolutely suits. Like, I really admire the cast for, you know, the ones that are being, all of them are quite good with very, I might, maybe a little bit of the child acting is not the best, but that's also, you know, this was back when we still couldn't always get tremendous talent for that. I'm very relieved to see that, you know, in recent movies, like, it's very rare these days that I see bad child acting. But the and I try not to blame the kids themselves. You know, it's really like adults should step in and say, I don't think this is completely working. And I'm not 100% certain I think that kids should act on such, like, in movies and such, anyway. And certainly, even if they, even when I find myself thinking, maybe it's not so bad, I definitely think we should do what we can to make sure that they get an education, that they have something to fall back on. You know, no one remains a child star forever. Yeah, the music, Danny Elfman, like, holy crap. And yeah, it's genuinely, that's another place where that's some of the best part of watching a Tim Burton movie, is the score, frequently by Danny Elfman. And yeah, I think this is one of my favorites of his. Oh, I guess I should briefly note, I'm afraid I'm not going to be ranking all of the movies that I've mentioned, the ones that I watched that Tim Burton wrote and or directed. Oh, Corpse Bride and The Nightmare Before Christmas. I don't know how I managed to forget those two, but yeah. Now I'm pretty sure I've mentioned every single one that I've watched of his, but a lot of them, it's been so many years since I last watched them, so I'm simply not going to be able to rank them in any kind of, yeah. Now, I think that does, yeah, the sound design is really, really great. And there is one particular aspect here where they really needed to nail that, and they absolutely do. So the characters, I thought, I won't give away if it's all, but certainly several characters here, I thought this did a really solid job of making them feel like real people. I mean, within the fairy tale framework, but they didn't just feel one note. And I think, yeah, moving on to the acting. As much as I really, yeah, I hope that Johnny Depp stops hurting people. I am willing to admit, there are times where he is really, really amazing in movies, and he inserted the obligatory, Tim Burton puts Johnny Depp in every movie he makes. I was not really a fan of his Mad Hatter, so I am willing to admit, that I don't think it always works out well, but a decent amount of the time, I do think it is a great match there. And yeah, it's a very subtle performance in a way that, like some of the stuff he's most well known for is not necessarily that. I've only watched the first of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Or is it Caribbean? I'm never sure. He's not necessarily blending into the background in that one. He's very that's a broad performance, and in that first movie, certainly that was what was called for. I think that pretty much is what I will say about him for now. Winona Ryder is one of those actresses. Yeah, she feels tailor-made for Burton's worlds, and it is fascinating to compare this to Beetlejuice. In Beetlejuice, she plays a role that is somewhat closer to the way she was when she was, like a teenager and such, where here it's very different. There's actually there's an anecdote in the IMDb trivia section. Yeah, it's about her experience with, yeah, and I don't know. There was a catharsis to reading it, but yeah, she really, really nailed it. Like, this is not the kind of thing that I would necessarily have thought. Like sometimes when you watch a movie, you can kind of tell, okay, this is very similar to the actor's real life, kind of, not necessarily the way they are right now, but the way they were, and yeah, it's genuinely quite impressive. She managed to find a truth in there. It's yeah, and she's just one of those and I guess that's a spoiler. Conchata Ferrell. I really miss, yeah. And she also does really, really well. Like, I mean, to me, not sure I've seen anything else that really tops her Two and a Half Men stuff, but this does understand how to, you know, like there were certain things she did especially well. She gives the characteristic chuckle very early in this, and that is more or less, yeah. It was fun seeing Arkin. I'm used to seeing him in less well, fairy tale kind of things, somewhat more. Well, I guess it's not only serious stuff, but stuff that is less um, fantastical than at least aspects of this. And he really does slot into it beautifully. Like when I first watched this movie, I didn't know him from anything else, and then later I watched some of his other work, and I was like, wow, okay, very impressive that he was able to, yeah. And it does help that he's given fairly good material as well. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name, but let's see. Crap, what was the character's name? Okay, I get. Well, yeah, it's not a spoiler to say he portrays the boyfriend of the Winona Ryder character, and yeah, him also. I saw him in this before I saw him in anything else, and was surprised when I saw some of his other stuff. But he really nails it. Playing very much. He has played a number of like more nerdy types, and here he plays kind of like a, what do they say, jerk jock, and he really nails it. And that pretty much covers, so I will just, one more that I definitely have to mention is Vincent Price, who I also really, really miss. I'm so glad that he appeared in so many movies, because I have thoroughly enjoyed watching, and across a number of decades as well. And yeah, like that was actually some years back. My father showed me a movie that he watched when he was young called The Wax Museum. House of Wax. Wow. Sorry. The Danish title would translate directly to Wax Museum, but it's called The House of Wax. And Vincent Price is so incredible in it. Yeah. I wish that I could say that I had watched anything of his before he passed. This was actually his last role. But in my defense, I was very, very little when this movie first came out. And while I had watched the... hold on, what's it called again? Or as a kid, at least. I definitely did watch The Great Mouse Detective. I hate to say it, but it was definitely a Danish dub rather than, I have since, year ago, 2 years ago or something, I watched it in English, and it's so unbelievably good in it. And that was apparently also something he was very happy to be able to do. So that's wonderful. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. There is some effects work that, like, once you'll know, but just watching it, like, you really are transported by it. This did not try to, push CG past what it could do. I'm actually not entirely certain if there is any CG. I think it might all be practical effects, and considering at least one particular thing that is genuinely impressive. And yeah, I mean, Stan Winston worked on it. Another artist that I really miss. And he apparently really appreciated, because like he used to go about like trying to find a way to make something make sense as if it was in the real world, which is part of how he and James Cameron work so well together, because that's very much his approach as well. And here he was like, you know what, this is a Tim Burton movie. I'm gonna go for this kind of... And apparently there was one aspect where like Tim Burton was actually surprised that they took something as literally as they did. And he was like, no, but that's perfect though. I hadn't even thought about like that you could do it quite like that. That's, yeah. And I agree. I'll talk about it in the spoiler section, but yeah. So this is at times a comedy, and it's one of those things where there are times where they go for a kind of edgy joke that perhaps was not the best choice. I'll discuss it in the spoiler section. It's not like constant, and a lot of the time when it has something that is dark, there is a reason for it. It's not just there as like attention grabby, which, you know, some of the 90s definitely did have. I've watched quite a lot of 90s movies. And to be clear, I myself have quite the fondness for edgy humor. I just think it's... there are some considerations you need to make, and I don't think I can really detail it without spoiling, so it'll have to wait for the thought section. But yeah, it is a funny movie that I appreciate it. There are times where it really doesn't go for the easy joke. Like, it tries to earn instead and make it feel consistent. And it's not really like non-stop laughing. You know, it's essentially a dramedy. And the various dark elements are handled with like it doesn't really try to hold back, and yet there's also room for stuff that isn't, you know, particularly dark. And there are aspects where it pushes the PG-13 as far as it could go back then, and there's not really anywhere that it feels like it is holding back, because the studio insisted it couldn't be R-rated. You know, Tim Burton, when he works within the R rating, he knows how to really use it. You know, Sleepy Hollow has some really... Oh wait, was that one PG-13? I feel like there's at least a version of it that's R-rated, because there's... No, yeah, it must be R-rated, I feel like. But yeah, moving on. But yeah, it feels like they genuinely thought about, well, should it be PG-13? Should, you know, which should we aim for? And it was an informed decision to go with PG-13, and it neither feels toned down or like edged up. Like, there's stuff in this that I'm really, really glad they didn't try to make like a PG movie, you know. I mean, I can never quite remember, was this before or after? Because he did make a Pee-wee movie, I think was what that character was called. I'm not really familiar with... I'm just, you know, I've seen clips and such, but yeah. It wasn't on kids' TV when I was a kid, I don't think. The Pee-wee stuff. I watched other stuff. Let's see. I think that does pretty much... Yeah. So, I rate this 8 deeply emotionally engaging gothic fairy tales out of 10. And that brings us to the thoughts section. So from here on out, I am spoiling absolutely everything about this movie. I know sometimes I go like chronologically. I might spoil the ending of this early in the video, so just be aware. I guess I'll briefly start with, the Christmas aspect. So, technically it's just like the last little bit of it is on Christmas, and we have the thing about the snow. It didn't used to snow, and now it always does. And one thing is that I think it captures something that I've always really found important about Christmas. Taking care of other people, helping those in need. I'm not a Christian, but I do think there is a lot of value to the, the love thy neighbor stuff. And I do think this does, it doesn't feel the need to have just a character sit down and say, can you believe we treated him so badly? It comes across, yeah, and I really really appreciate that about it. I think I am gonna go over so the idea that he has not hand scissors but scissor hands. There's so much there that I think is just like, this is one of those pieces of media that really shows the power of allegory, because like in the real world, no one literally has scissor hands, but a lot of people who don't feel accepted, or who perhaps genuinely are not accepted, the two of them do not always go together, but one does not necessarily preclude the other. Yeah, it can feel like, there is even the line, everything you touch, you break. I think it was something along those lines. Yeah, and that, and the fact that we only see, so for most of the movie, like we find out, very early that the inventor, the Dr. Frankenstein, because this is, of course, as others have already pointed out, I'm not saying I'm getting to it first. It is a version of the classic Frankenstein, and this is one of those cases where I feel like I'm so glad that movies like this can be made, where it's like, because like if you just want, Frankenstein, like there's, by the time this was made, there were already, several, I suppose, was there more than one continuity? No, yeah, I think there wasn't there both, because there was like, holy crap, can I really not remember? Was that Bela Lugosi? I know he played at least one classic movie monster, and I think there was at least some Hammer horror Frankenstein as well. Yeah. you wouldn't necessarily go to this if you want a straight Frankenstein, and the but yeah, it feels like it's, what if we spent more time with people seeing Frankenstein's monster, and it was a more gradual thing of people not, at first, a lot of people seem welcoming towards him, and some genuinely seem to mean it. Peg, and once Kim gets over the initial shock, they do actually, care about him. And honestly, I think the Arkin character also does, for quite consistently. Now, let's see. So that was the fact that we find out that the inventor died. That we find that out very early on. You have the thing about, like, he didn't wake up, which is such a perfect way for a seemingly immortal, unaging being to describe death, because that's what it would look like, And we only see his death close to the very end. And we have that thing about, like, yeah, this whole movie, Edward has been worried about getting too close to people because he didn't really understand what happened there. Like, clearly, again, that's made clear when he tells Peg he didn't wake up. So, yeah, like, he does worry about that, but at the same time, he is lonely. And it is the Scissorhands, it works so well as, I think, okay, so before, I feel like this is starting to get a little bit dry. So to spice it up a tiny bit, I really love the prosthetic that they made, because it really is like, yeah, I mean, that is what it would look like if someone had scissors for fingers, and the fact that there is some degree of actually being able to, like, obviously he's not actually, when we see him, like, cutting an ice sculpture, he's not really doing that with the prosthetic there, but there are times where you can clearly see it move. And that was also what I meant about the sound design, the noise of cutting and slicing and stuff like that, wonderfully done. It absolutely nails it, because it is crucial that we believe it. This is a 100-minute movie. We meet him 5 minutes in, maybe, or something. He's in the entire rest of the movie. If we don't buy the Scissorhands, the movie just does not work. It's crucial that we latch onto that. And yeah, it's a real credit to the various and so yeah, apparently when Burton drew, the like, he was just thinking, like, yeah, it's like sharp fingers, essentially. But they took it so literally, that because he's called Edward Scissorhands, so they just designed something where it's literally scissor hands, and he realized that that was perfect. And it's one of those things, like, sometimes artists kind of have to get out of their own way, because, like, if he had just said, I mean, not literally scissor hands, it's allegory, so just give me sharp fingers. But yeah, by the time that he realized that that was how they interpreted it, they already had something to show him, and he was like, that's perfect. That wasn't even what I was, where my mind was going. And yeah, so the Scissorhands obviously means that when he touches something, there is some chance that he could, if it's a person or a living thing, he could hurt them. If it's a material object, he could damage it. And we do see, there are times where he does accidentally, cut. And that, again, it's so crucial that the movie's able to make it clear to the audience he's not doing that on purpose. Imagine how the movie would fall apart if near the end there was a substantial percentage of the audience watching who think he's purposely hurting Kevin. Because we have just seen him, cutting some of the hedges that he cut, cutting them wrong this time. And, he sliced up the walls and stuff like that, But the only time where he uses the scissors to purposefully hurt another person is killing Kim's ex. And, the guy is waving a gun around, shooting. He kicked Kim, in real life, I would always say violence should only ever be the last resort. I'm not saying it's never necessary. It was necessary to stop the Nazis in World War II, and Stonewall needed to happen. But with that said, in media, it can be cathartic, and they did need something there at the end, and I think it works that it is, because, we need something to really solidify, okay, no one, there are still people who sympathize with him, I mean, essentially Kim and her entire family still do, but no one goes up there looking for him. And part of that is also that they believe Kim. They take her word for it that he's dead. But yeah. It's important that a lot of characters in this story don't realize how much he was a victim, that he didn't really try to do all these things that hurt people. And then at the same time, the scissors also mean that he has this capacity to create beauty in the world. And as soon as that is, I think it's very noteworthy that is what, when Peg first sees him, she thinks that he's holding weapons. That's the common initial reaction to seeing him. And as soon as she realizes he's an artist, he cut all these hedges and there's, then there is the, and some people take advantage of him, but yeah, Kim and her family genuinely do seem to want things to work out for him. And yeah, I think that pretty much brings us to, so others have already read this as Edward being autistic coded. And I am not going to pretend like I'm anywhere near as good as reading that sort of thing in media as Otterly Noah, so make sure to watch his videos on such. And in general, I think I've liked every single video I've seen of his. There are a few that I haven't. Well, I haven't watched. Certainly not in his entire backlog. Anyway, I myself have ADHD, and that is obviously not the exact same thing as being on the autistic spectrum. There are some similarities. I have met a few dozen autistic people, and they are, some of them are some of the nicest people you'd ever hope to meet. I am a big believer in that, they are not inherently lesser. It's yeah, I can't stand when people just only see the minority status of someone and then judge them. And that is one of the things that this movie does a good job exploring. I think so. Let's see. Scissorhands is a really powerful metaphor for being on the autistic spectrum. Am I quoting? I hope. It's been a while since I watched Ollie Noah's videos on it. I forget if he might himself have made that point. I'm not trying to copy his homework or something, but yeah, this thing of like, there are a number of autistic people who are very artistic. I'm not saying all of them. And some people don't even perceive that because they just note the, one of the common things, for example, that a lot of people really struggle to get past is that a number of autistic people struggle with social interaction. So, yeah, Scissorhands, for the reasons I've gone into, pitch perfect metaphor for that. And I read that Tim Burton actually, when he found out that people were reading it, the character as autistic, he was like, well, maybe I, Tim Burton, am autistic. And I think that does pretty much cover... Let's see. I think that does get us to the... Yeah, let's do some scene by scene. So I'm going to start with the framing device, actually. I thought they did a really good job hiding, like, part of it is the glasses, and she changes her voice just enough, and the old age makeup. Yeah, like the first time that I watched this movie, I did not realize that was Winona Ryder at the very start. And I think it is clever to not, there's so many studio people who would have been like, well, I mean, as soon as we meet her in the story, like in, outside of the framing device, you should have her, narrate to her granddaughter, look, that's me. And that would have taken so much away from it, Yeah, it's such a pitch perfect, because the moment the glasses come off, we see her eyes, it's like, oh, and she says, I know because I was there. And yeah, that's why it always snows, because he's making all these ice sculptures, and one of them is of her dancing when he was making an ice sculpture, dancing in the snow that it was making when he was, yeah, just so beautiful. And it's one of those things, as Otterly Noah also points out, some of the best representation for autistic people is actually autistic coded characters, rather than movies and shows that come right out and say, okay, this character, they're autistic, and we're going to do autistic stories with them, and yeah, it's like there's so many people who, if you watch this movie and you read them as Edward, you understand them so much better. And yeah, I think I will just briefly note, so I don't think I'm the first person to point out, yeah, the thing near the end where she says, the granddaughter says, you could go up there, and Kim says, I'm an old woman now, I want him to remember me as I was. It's one of those things, like, I understand that some people perceive that as romantic. I think, let's see, I think it might be the pop culture detective who points out, it's actually much more romantic if you continue loving the person you love, not, and that doesn't like diminish as like age sets in, and I think I do think it is good that it ends as this sort of tragic romance, where they do still, he clearly still thinks about her, and she knows that that's what's, I just don't think that it should be, because the thing is, you could so easily have had the line be, if I walked up there, what if someone followed me and found him? There you go. Like that, yeah. But yeah, and it is genuinely clever. She normally doesn't tell this story, but you know, who's even I mean, I guess maybe Kevin and some of the others were kids back then, but did they have that much of a I mean Kevin liked Edward, and some of the other kids also thought he was cool, but that was about it. It was really mostly the adults who were, very scared of what they thought he might do. And then, Kim's ex, who is dead long before she retells the story to her granddaughter. So, yeah, it's one of those things like, it's not really gonna cause harm, you know. And let's see. I think that might pretty much, yes. So, once we're past the framing device, right, we also have the, as usual, great visual opening credits scene. We see well, let's see, the very start, is that when we see at least one of the machines, maybe? I think we see some drawings of Edward, and we see the inventor lying dead on the floor, which I read somewhere that was apparently filmed when he basically fell asleep on set, that they weren't supposed to be doing that, and it's a little bit morbid. But I do also think it is very clear that he was a real fan of Vincent Price. He also got him to, oh right, that was another one that I watched, the short Vincent, where he narrated it. But yes, yeah. So yeah, Peg, going door to door, and the thing about weren't you just here? No, not since last season. That really tells you immediately, yeah, people find, we see very clearly, we also have Joyce. She says, you see a car in my driveway. Why are you, coming to my door? Kind of thing. So it is this thing of, yeah, her neighbors find her annoying for her job, and yeah, that hearty chuckle. The next time you alter your look, and Conchata Ferrell just yeah. Oh, that's a good one, Peg. And let's see. Yeah, the teen girl who so which one do you like best? Oh, I think they're both nice. Ah, I agree. They're both very nice on you. I don't have money, right? Thanks. You I am so glad you waited until she had already talked you through and let you use samples and all that stuff before telling her that. But yeah, teenagers sometimes. And I guess that does. So Joyce represents one of my least favorite elements of this movie. So I want to start by acknowledging there are issues with, it's this thing of she is the the housewife who spends a lot of time bored. And it is true that some of them are sexually frustrated or otherwise, yeah, they have they're dealing with things. I do think the movie could have gone into that without turning her into the, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned trope. That yeah, I think I'll talk about it when I get to that part. I think I'm gonna try to keep it more or less chronological. But yeah, even here at the start, she's very heavily flirting with the plumber, and acting like he's he's a lifesaver, and I could never have done this without. And the thing is, if it was just like, yeah, every so often, she maybe has casual sex, that wouldn't have to be a problem. Because in real life, like, well, let's see. Okay, now I am not entirely sure. There are several men in the neighborhood, so it doesn't seem like Peg is the only married woman there, but I could not say exactly who else is married. Obviously, if Joyce is married, then she should not be cheating. And it's one of those things where also, it kind of implies then that she as a woman is cheating because she's just a little bored, which, I mean, I appreciate, you could also read it as she's lonely, but I feel like they're pushing towards more than, yeah. And like, when you actually look at in the real world, and to be clear, I'm not saying this has to reflect the real world. I'm saying they get so close to the real world with that one that the inaccuracies I find to be problematic. In the real world, when a woman cheats on the man she's with, a lot of the time it's because she feels unloved, maybe unsafe, and the movie could have gone into that, but yeah, I think there's at least one time where we see a man that I'm pretty sure is her husband, but like I don't know what their relationship is like at all. So what we leave the movie feeling like is, well, I guess she was bored, and so she, she either does or at least attempts to have sex with a plumber. There at the start of the movie. Later, she attempts to have sex with Edward, and like, you just did not need that in there. Like, it's not even really that much about that. The like, comparatively, the movie is definitely about, well, is he really being accepted? Because so many of these suburbanites and such will say, should you maybe get prosthetic limbs instead of those? And are you sure you want? I mean, you wouldn't be special anymore. And things like that, these are things that people with disabilities are sometimes actually told or asked to their faces. And I don't have a prosthetic limb, so I'm not trying to speak for the ones who do. I have heard the ones who do. Some of them say it's offensive to ask. Like, it is one thing to just say, if you need help with that, I know someone, I can get you in touch with them. And I do think they do that a good job of that at the TV show, because that first person just says, do you think you'd like that? Because I have a name, and the host, immediately runs with it and is like, we're going to get that name, and we're going to get that into motion. But then a couple of others, add in their 2 cents, and it does start to get insensitive, and that's such a, that's one of the places where the movie really shines. The disability allegory is very substantial. There's so much there, and there just isn't with the false rape accusation that Joyce makes towards Edward, And again, I really don't think that the fact that Joyce is, her being bored doesn't by itself have to be a problem. But if you're not going to do anything with it, she's not quite as much of an antagonist as Kim's ex, but she's kind of up there. And, along with the, what was her name? Esmeralda? The one who keeps calling him demonic and such. You know what? This is starting to get a little too heavy. Let's move on. I do have more to say about her character, and we'll get to it. But yeah. So, Peg is like crossing out names. Is like nobody's buying what I'm selling, and then she adjusts the mirror, and it perfectly captures the Gothic castle, and there's just so much to love there. So the fact that she just adjusts the mirror a tiny bit and is right there, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess maybe there was some kind of enchantment that made us forget that there's a castle there, because apparently no one goes there, just wonderfully fairy tale kind of thing. You know what? One more recommendation. I'm not saying it's the last one, but for now, making at least one more recommendation of a video. Lindsay Ellis talking about the live-action remake of Beauty and the Beast. And I'm afraid I forget the name of it, but yeah, fantastic job. And she points out, it really sucks a lot of the fun out of this fairy tale to over-explain all this stuff. And yeah. Now, but yeah, other than that, the design of this castle, like, holy crap. And the fact that it is, like, there at the end, Kim walks there. She doesn't drive. She walks from her home up to this castle, and that's a thing that anyone in this suburb could have done at any time and choose not to. And Peg really only does it because it's sort of her job. It's like, well, no one's buying here in the suburbs. And that does tell you so much about the incurious nature of a lot of suburbanites. And that is such an accurate observation. Tim Burton is not the only person who's made it. I cannot believe I'm blanking on it. I'm pretty sure that was one of the things that Todd Solondz noted in at least one of his movies on the hell of suburbia. But I think that does bring us to... Yeah, essentially, like, if Joyce hadn't had the plumber over, it seems like Helen probably doesn't buy very often, if ever. But yeah, maybe Joyce could have bought some, and that's why this didn't happen sooner. And that again it's such a fairy tale logic kind of thing. This thing of like, it was there. Anyone could have at any time, but people just didn't, because and I do think there is something powerful there. I wouldn't want every story we tell to be a fairy tale. I do really love when a story goes out of its way to make a ton of logical sense. It's one of the things I love about 1982's The Thing. And I personally think there's a lot of that as well in the I guess really multiple movies of David Cronenberg. Videodrome, The Fly. Yeah, moving on before I'm just listing his entire filmography. Yeah, I do think just this idea that suddenly it just and yeah, she goes up there, and the way that there's like dark clouds behind the castle, even though it's like sunny otherwise, it's like it's that let's see, what is that cartoon character who always has a dark cloud over their head? Is it a Dilbert character? It might be a Dilbert character. So obviously I am no longer, I used to be, but then he went and expressed some opinions. I'm no longer a fan of Dilbert. Some more news talked about the various, I think if you look up his name and then search for his name on the Some More News channel, you'll find at least one video they did. And yeah, like I'm just gonna direct you to that video or those. I forget if there's more than one. Anyway, yes. So yeah, she goes up there, and once she's inside the castle, it does look beautiful, And I thought it worked really well the way that yeah, it looks darker there at the end again because Edward has been away for a while and he makes things beautiful. It's just not everybody realizes that. And yeah, so she goes up there and sees these beautiful things, and that machine. I forget exactly where it pops up. I guess it's a flashback, isn't it? Huh. But yeah, the machine that's like making breakfast, like pulling an egg apart and whiskey and stomping on stuff and rolling pin the dough, I think it's called, to make food. Just wonderful. And yeah, so I so appreciate that they did that with practical effects. Like, I'm sorry, it would have been so awkward if they tried to do that with CG. And it must have been so much work to actually make that. I mean, I appreciate, obviously, we don't see the entire thing all in one. They do some choice little edits, and we're so wowed by what we're seeing that we don't necessarily notice, oh, hey, it's actually like, multiple different pieces that each can do one thing, rather than, oh, they made a thing that could do this whole thing out in a single, yeah. But we, yeah, so she goes up, and first there's like the shadow, and he just disappears. Not the Alec Baldwin, Russell Mulcahy, I would say, movie. Anyway, and she goes up, and he's in there, and she's like, "Why are you sitting here all alone in the dark?" Because she's not seeing the Scissorhands; she's seeing a human being. And then temporarily, she's scared when she sees the scissors and thinks that he's holding knives out towards her. And once she realizes that's not the case, she again realizes, no, this is just a person. And when she starts to leave and says, I see that I've disturbed you, and he just says the words, "Don't go." It's such a pitch perfect distillation of he is lonely, and he struggles to understand why it is people are so scared of him, because like he doesn't fully understand all of the, like over the course of it he comes to better understand that people are scared of the scissor hands, but yeah, it is still at that point in the movie, he really struggles to understand, and all he knows is that he does want to be around other people. And that is one aspect where I think, so I don't know if I've established it enough in this video, so I'll come out and say it. Sometimes the way he makes his movies, Tim Burton can be a bit of a misogynist, and we see that with Joyce. But then at the same time, like Peg and in the long term, Kim, we do there see these more, like there's so many misogynists who are unwilling to acknowledge the positive aspects of female socialization. I'm not talking about, like, we're not doing gender essentialism, not on this channel. And yeah, the way that, Kim is at the very start scared of him, understandably. Once she sees past the exterior, she, like Peg, sees the human being underneath. And there are a number of, I do think it is noteworthy that some of the characters who treat him the best, who treat him with the most empathy, are some of the female characters. And yeah, I think that pretty much gets, because, she asks, where's your mother? Where's your father? And yeah, so yeah, she gets him into the car and drive home. And that's also where we have this kind of misogynistic thing. So I appreciate that it seems like essentially everyone in the suburbs is fascinated with him. Kids think he's cool. For some of the men, Bill essentially like says, "Oh, so I was kind of, I had all these speeches prepared for when Kevin was a little older. I guess I can use them on Edward. We can workshop something to, yeah, he's very, very fatherly in a way there. But the fact that so many of the women, the moment that they catch a glimpse of it, is, oh, I don't know him. And they call each other, and then they call her, and they use up the entire tape's worth of messages just asking her to call them back. And like, we're clearly meant to think that there's something wrong with their curiosity, which, again, I appreciate. One of the things about the suburbs is that they struggle to accept in outsiders, and that was very much, Tim Burton growing up in the suburbs. He didn't really fit in, and so he felt like, he relates a lot to Edward. That's why he wrote Edward. That's why he wrote the story as he did. So I appreciate that. And I don't know. For sure, it's possible that some of the people who were the most bad to Tim when he was younger were women and girls. I don't know. But the way that they, in their defense, they're not used to someone coming in from the outside like this. And for a while, they seem more curious. Like, it's really only the, I'm worried I'm getting her name wrong, so I'm just going to call her the religious one. She's really the only one who is completely unwilling from right away to invite him in. The rest of them do. And it feels, there's a lot of misogynists who think that there's something inherently wrong with women talking about things that they are fascinated by with each other, sometimes without at least one of the people present that is affected by it. And I, as a cis man, I have not been around when women were talking as just, when it's just women and or girls talking. But I can speak to what I have heard from women and girls on the left which is that at least some of the time it is about trying to find out, is there a problem here? Do we need to, you know, can we help this person, you know? And that's part of why a number of misogynistic men take issue with it, because that's sometimes how a abusive man is kept from being alone with a woman who doesn't know that he is potentially abusive. You know, obviously, like, if she chooses to, if she genuinely, you know, that's like, it might be necessary to do an intervention. But one of the key things is, a lot of the time, by the time the woman knows that this is a man who is abusive, she might already be alone with him, and he might be carrying out abuse. And I find it disturbing that there are a number of men who seem like, there are men who seem like they're not even really misogynistic, but they're still buying the anti-gossip propaganda, you know. And yeah, I think this movie could have challenged it instead of perpetuating it. I think that does pretty much cover the yeah. So the let's see. So she, I guess I'll briefly note, yeah, you know, we have multiple times where he, you know, let's see, I think I already mentioned, you know, sometimes he accidentally cuts, you know, cuts skin and draws blood. He sometimes does that to himself as well, which is, you know, part of why he has some facial scars. And I think they do that just enough, because the first time we see him accidentally do it to himself is very early. I think it might even be that first scene with Peg, or very soon after, maybe after they get the house. But it's very early, and the last time he does it, you know, I mean, I guess yeah, he accidentally cuts Kim's hand near the end, and then he stabs her ex. And yeah, it's, you know, we never really forget that hypothetically, potentially, he could be dangerous, but it's also underlined repeatedly, he's not doing that on purpose. It's not something that he, you know, he is not interested in harming others. And that's where, like, some of the subtlety of the performance really shines through, because, like, it's that thing of, like, he's not that good at moving and smiling and such in a way that other people find reassuring. So they kind of just see Scissorhands and, you know, this face that isn't, that doesn't come across as reassuring, again, because, you know, autistic coding. And that is something that, you know, I think it's important that we all learn as children to be able to look past, you know, because, like, I get it's a lizard brain thing, you know, we see something like, you know, yeah, and we think, oh, dangerous, you know, I have to be on the lookout. And you might tell someone else, oh, that person's dangerous, even though you don't have proof that they're dangerous, because you might actually believe, no, if I don't, you know, I could save this person from, you know, the dangerous person. But when you actually look at, you know, some really notorious serial killers, they fake smiles really well, you know, and some of them were conventionally attractive. So it doesn't guarantee, you know, yeah. Moving on. So yeah, Peg, you know, she wants to help in any way she can. So one of the things she does is gets him, you know, to a place where he can be around more people, since he expresses he's lonely. Gets him away from this castle where people don't come to visit him. And she tries to use the makeup to make him, to make it less visible that he has these scars. And yeah, that is genuinely like, I don't know. I can't help but note that she tries to help like that, whereas, the Arkin character is like, so, capitalism. Like, really? That's what you're bringing to the table. I mean, points for honesty. I guess he either doesn't think that highly of himself, or maybe just thinks really highly of capitalism. But yeah, and yeah, so the way that both Kevin and Arkin's character, they are like staring at Edward, and he's struggling with the food because he can't really pick up the utensils, and the way that Peg calls them out and says, "Stop staring," and the let's see, I guess that pretty much brings us to the yeah. So the first time that Edward and Kim meet, it's one of those things. So again, I am not saying that this movie needed to be realistic. I appreciate it's a fairy tale. I do think that the way that it kind of frames Kim as being like, we're supposed to think that it's ridiculous that she's so scared of him when, like, she comes home, finds a stranger in her bed who appears to be holding sharp objects. Like, the thing is, this is literally the exact kind of thing that, like, suburbanites like have nightmares about, coming home and there's someone in their bed and they've got a sharp object like this. So off the top of my head, Halloween 1978, Nightmare on Elm Street 1984, Depp was in that one as well. Like, this is something that it doesn't make sense. It's an irrational fear, but this movie kind of acts as though we should judge her for having that irrational fear, where, I think the two aforementioned horror movies do a really good job of exploring, that fear. And the thing is, as soon as Kim comes home and sees him, they like immediately open that other bed, and he sleeps there. And I appreciate that they thought that Kim wasn't coming back until the next day. And it's one of those things, like, I think you have to be careful when you punish a teenage character in a piece of media for doing something they shouldn't. Because, like, at the end of the day, okay, so she came home a day early. What's the big deal? Like, she came home. Like, you'd have a point if she was, like, showing up to a place that wasn't her home, where she didn't still live, for example. And like, hypothetically, let's say that she agreed with, she got hired a place, and she was supposed to start on the 12th. And instead, she shows up on the 11th and expects to just immediately be able to work there. And, there could be issues there if she doesn't contact them and say, hey, would it be okay if I came on the 11th instead of waiting to the 12th? But her going home, like, she even had the key and everything. Like, it's not... And I don't think that it had to necessarily... I appreciate that they... I think it could have worked. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing to have it start with them sort of getting off on the wrong foot, because they kind of both scare each other. He's very timid. He gets scared of her as well. So maybe just have something where maybe she doesn't normally live at home anymore, and so it's just like her old room, and she goes back to her old room to pick something up. Maybe there's some kind of issue between her and the parents, so that we're thinking, oh, that's why she didn't want to talk to them. But as it is, like, yeah, on the one hand, it's like, well, why is it a big deal that she's coming home one day early? It's one day. They were expecting her the very next day. That's one thing. And on the other hand, it's also like, wait, if she's just coming home one day early, why does she? Oh, and I think, isn't she the one who has the line about like, oh, of course I didn't call my parents. They don't have me under lock and key like your fascist father. I'm not. I might be paraphrasing slightly, but yeah, yeah. I don't think that they completely came up with something that worked quite as well as it should, and it really it one of the things that especially bothers me about it is that right after, you've got the Arkin character sitting there talking about like, oh, she's so completely ridiculous, and he's like describing puberty in this really creepy clinical way, and it bothers me that there's not that much challenging of it, because like ultimately, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I have pretty much made my point about it. Yeah, like as an example, I thought it worked fine. The thing about, so he gives him something to drink and says, lemonade, and then later he vomits because he thinks, when it's actual lemonade, it's not a euphemism. But yeah, the fact that, she's supposed to say hi to him, and then the way his face and his mouth, the noise he makes and that sort of thing, I thought that worked. It's this thing of like the because that's kind of that's the Arkin character being a little silly. Like, well, let's see. I mean, if you want there to be a pleasant interaction there, maybe don't give him liquor. You don't even know. I mean, you can see he has scissors for hands. You don't know the exact nature of, I mean, the fact that he otherwise looks human. I mean, he's humanoid, but, I saw somewhere someone wrote that, the black leather, I think it is implied to be his actual body, like his skin, not clothing he's wearing. So, yeah, I mean, the hand scissors are just the most scissor hands are just the most like clear example that he's not quite the same as the rest of them. So that felt like, yeah, that's him being like, dude, what are you doing? Like, are you trying to torpedo any chance of the two of them having a positive relationship? And they're, because also there they don't have her like run away screaming and this whole thing, they don't make such a huge deal about it. They just have her, face is like, what is this, what's going on here? That I thought worked. Now, I forget exactly where it happened, so I'll just talk about it here. Yeah, the show and tell thing was genuinely funny, and yeah, Edward actually likes it. Like, clearly, we can tell when he's being shy and when he's actually like, as soon as he says one karate chop, and then he does it, and they're all like, oh, and you could see on his face like, this is so cool, they like it. They actually, they're not, like they're what's the word? They're enraptured by the Scissorhands. They aren't saying that there's something wrong with them. They think it's fascinating. And I think that does pretty well get us to the yeah, and then later it's like, oh, there was show and tell again. Yeah, there was 10 or 12, I forget what animal it was, but yeah, yeah, a litter of that animal, and it's like, yeah, by now they've gotten used to Edward, and that is something. It's not only the suburb, but it is, it's people who are perhaps not the most curious, the most empathetic. Yeah, like once they're used to something, they're not necessarily gonna be as sensitive, Like also the thing about like maybe we should play, so I'm just gonna say it the way that I'm used to saying it: rock paper scissors. I think they changed it because he has scissor hands, so they say scissors first. But yeah, and yeah, at first they're like, oh, let's play, and then later it's like, I don't want to play anymore. I always win. Well, you could, get a little creative with rules or something. I don't know. I mean, you don't have to be, you know, a jerk to him. It's not like he can help the scissor hands. And yeah, I think so. Another thing I don't love when so Peg calls, you know, the head office and talks to the person in charge. And so you have that thing about like she gets some advice on how to cover the scarring on Edward's face. And basically it's just that, so on the one hand, I am not trying to discount. I appreciate there are a number of women who are very happy about being able to bond with other women about makeup. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I don't love this thing of they kind of make it almost her entire thing. Like I do appreciate, I think it really works when they make sure to temper it with her also talking, like the part where she, it has nothing to do with makeup when she's asking about like what happened to your mother and father, for example. And, yeah, there's stuff like that. I think that works. But yeah, and this thing of like, and I think this might also be, I forget exactly how Tim Burton feels about capitalism. I read it once, but I simply do not remember anymore. But it feels slightly so because the thing about she started out selling cosmetics door to door too, and now she's the head of the company. That is one of those things, like, I mean, sometimes it happens, but a lot of the time that is not how you become the head of a company. There's a very limited degree of social mobility in America under capitalism. So it's possible that the movie is, yeah, like invoking that in a way that feels, because it almost feels kind of silly. I don't know. Am I projecting? I'm not saying the movie has to be, far left. I'm trying not to project my own personal politics. It just felt slightly, yeah, I don't know. Yes, moving on. So let's see, we have the thing where, I thought it worked the way that, so there's a degree of politeness for a lot of, like, essentially Kim's ex and the kids are essentially, well, I guess also, what was his name? Danny? The guy who drives. They're never particularly polite. Other than that, well, I don't know, at times Kevin is, but other than that, the adults tend to be polite, at least early on. And then after a while, it starts to turn. And it is this thing of like, well, did they like him? Or was he just like shiny new toy, perfect victim kind of thing, And I did think that worked. And I thought they struck a really good balance. Like, for example, Peg, like we hear her say a lot of things where she's being polite to Edward. And, at the same time, it doesn't feel put on. Like it feels slightly staged in the way that it is a Gothic fairy tale. It is, it has some criticisms of suburbia, but it is also saying, no, but that's Peg though. Like she is actually, she means it. I mean, the worst thing she says, if I recall correctly, is essentially, maybe it would be better if he was up in the castle. Like she doesn't say, like, it's not as though no one in the movie wants to kill him. Kim's ex goes out of his way to try to kill him, and is really seemingly only stopped by Edward, you know, bringing scissors to a gunfight and, you know, striking first. And I think that does pretty much... Yeah, I thought it worked, the scene where... Yeah, so the many gags where Edward will do something with his scissor hands, you know, he struggles to... He's trying to pick up a pea, you know, and other of the food with the scissor hands. And then he's like, oh, would you like some butter? And he just slices a little bit of the butter with one of the scissor fingers. And the shish kebab hand thing. The, let's see. Yeah, the part where he accidentally, you know, he touches the microphone and gets a shock and such. Yeah, the part where, so they invite people over, and you know, at that point Kim is still not, you know, super happy about it, and he accidentally drops the food, and the other one says, I don't think it's sanitary, he used his fingers. And yeah, let's see, yeah, the thing about how, you know, he's like, oh, you know, my father just wants me to earn stuff. And it's like, well, you poor dear. How horrible that he refuses to... I mean, they call it spoil for a reason, you know? I mean, listen, I'm not one of those people who say that, you know, you should be, like, super restrictive with your kids. But, I mean, it has been demonstrated, like, kids who grow up with access to a lot of luxury stuff and maybe aren't, you know, made to, for example, save up money if there's something they really want that's, you know, maybe costs more than they have right now. You know, if you tell them, you know, like they might ask, you know, can I have some money for this? And you might point out, you know, well, I mean, you're saving up money for another thing. Maybe you could use that money for this thing. And they might say, but that's my money. You know, there is actual... So I do appreciate that. That is a very... Yeah, that is sadly very true of this kind of middle and upper class teenager, you know, and yeah, I do appreciate the fact that the Arkin character actually says, yeah, I actually agree with him on that. And I think that pretty much... Yeah, and that's also, you know, fairly early. It said, you know, my dad just won't let me use this expensive stuff. And then later he convinces Kim to convince Edward to convince his Scissorhands to convince the lock to let them in. And, you know, that does not go so well. And I do really appreciate that. You know, they lie to, you know, this disability, let's see, disable coded character to get them to do something that we later find out he knows technically is wrong, but, you know, he was asked by her and he really wants to make her happy. And, you know, he's the one who pays the price. And that is, again, such a strong... That's part of why I do overall love this movie. It really does have things to say. One, you know, one example is people on the autistic spectrum. Another is people who maybe have a mental health diagnosis or the like. A lot of people feel like they can get away with lying about them. There are people who, you know, a lot of people, sadly, who don't trust people who are, you know, for example, not neurotypical, you know, who are neurodivergent in some way. And yeah, I do really appreciate that some of the worst things in that happen in this movie are the direct result of Kim's ex being a jerk. And I think that does bring us to, let's see, the so we have the big uh I forget what those are called now, but the garden party maybe, where the neighbors meet Edward, and some of the dads just like make jokes like, we'd like to play cards with you, but you can't cut. That's a dad joke right there. And let's see. Yeah, there's I thought we were making shish kebab. It's a figure of speech. You have to learn not to take things so literally. Well, later, a lot of people do think he attempted to take something literally. And yeah, the bit where, so it starts with just, the Arkin character, he's just trimming hedges and trying to listen to the game. It's like, oh, turn up, and then suddenly, I think it's Kevin who spots, like, Dad, look at Edward, and he's like, because he just noticed, oh, we're trimming hedges. I can trim hedges, and that's, I've seen several people on the autistic spectrum in real life, as soon as they realize, oh, now we can do that thing, and then they just like jump into it. They can go from being incredibly shy to just, yeah, and yeah, that felt a lot like that, and yeah, he genuinely is just absolutely incredible at this, and suddenly he's trimming everybody's hedges. And then, there's also the dogs, and the let's see, I think that does get us to, yeah, I like that, after he gives one of the dogs that, then they show the dog on the stage at the show, they see this is what he does, which also helps the audience accept he's not dangerous. Look, he's kind to, fuzzy animals kind of thing, and yeah, the couple of times where, either Edward or Kim is looking at the other one's face, and just, or not always only face, and the yeah, it's genuinely very sweet, them being so infatuated with each other. And when he is asked, do you have a girlfriend, and Kim is like, what is he gonna say? And yeah, Kevin and Kim's ex both, making fun of his crush on her, which is, pretty evident to anyone paying even a little bit of attention. I think, what does that get us? We are pretty far into it. I guess I think yeah, so Joyce, has him, she wants to set up this, yeah, well, sheer heaven, and yeah, she, so she has him come in there and, into the back room. And that's, I think it is also noteworthy, she is one of the least patient with him. Several of the others are like, oh, Edward, we're over here now. But she's like, Edward, come on now, It is clearly a selfish desire. It's not really about what he wants. Like, the one time where she isn't being selfish is when she stops him from, he almost touches the, what's it called? Electrical panel, which, that would not go well. But yeah, yes. So she, asks if he would like her to model the smocks, and then she does, and then she, gets on him in the chair, And like, it is plain to see that he is not consenting, verbally or otherwise. He doesn't really understand. Like, he's just saying yes to be polite. Yeah, and so essentially what we're witnessing is she is sexually assaulting someone who in some ways seems to have like he clearly doesn't fully understand the world outside the castle, you know? And to be clear, I'm not saying that women never, you know, do such a thing. There are women who are sexual predators, including towards men. I am terrible at remembering the numbers, so if you very badly want to look at the numbers, which I do think, you know, every so often one should look at the numbers, obviously, please, you know, feel free to look it up. I don't think that the movie is handling it with the required degree of sensitivity. It ends up kind of feeling like, well, you know, if a housewife is bored for long enough, I guess she's eventually just going to become a sexual predator, huh? And considering that it really doesn't add anything, yeah, I'm starting to repeat myself. So, yeah, I really think they could have done more there. Pretty much everything more I have to say about that entire aspect is just to direct you to Datamail. Did at least one video talking about the myths of, you know, surrounding the idea of false rape accusations, which, you know, I'm not saying and he's not saying that those never ever happen. It's just that there's a lot of misinformation regarding it. And he goes over a lot of I think every single of the most common myths he goes over in one of my videos there. So, yeah, I think that does pretty much cover, yeah, you know, I mean, basically, the idea is she's embarrassed that he walked away from her, and then he tells, you know, Kim and her family about it, and so she is like trying to save face by saying that he attempted to rape her. And it's just so messed up to have, because like there are way too many misogynists who think that rape is much rarer than it actually is, and that false rape accusations are more common and more likely to ruin the life of the man. And so there's so many cases where it's plain to see, yeah, this was rape or attempted rape, sexual predatory behavior of some kind, and you have a bunch of misogynist men trying to pick holes in it and trying to like appeal to, oh, this is not a perfect victim. Perfect victims don't exist in the real world. That's another thing. Like, I don't love, I'm not saying that it would have been better if he hadn't been a perfect victim, but it is a little silly the way that they really do go above and beyond to make him the perfect victim here. That yeah, I think that might bring us to, so let's see. Yeah, the thing about, you know, well, now that you are gonna have this salon, you should go to the bank. You know, that's definitely gonna work. And then smash cut, this is definitely not gonna work. That was really great. And that's where I definitely feel like I'm not reading too much into it. That feels like it's like criticism of capitalism there, you know. Because it's like, well, you don't have a social security number, you don't have prior work, like, what part of Scissorhands are you not getting? Like, did you not watch that show that he appeared on where they talk about, like, that's not really, you know, it doesn't make any sense to ask that of him, but, you know, that's capitalism for you. To be clear, I'm not saying that there are cases quite as, you know, surreal in the real world that would make them real rather than surreal, but yeah, unreasonable expectations. Like it's like that thing about, you can only get this job if you have this amount of work experience, and then someone comes in, well, I can't get a job without work experience. How am I supposed to, get work experience? Well, get a job. It's, yeah. Let's see. I think, yeah, and Peg really standing up for him was great there. And I think that brings us to, so yeah, Helen, takes him to the, and she has his scissor hands sharpened. That's genuinely kind of sweet, because, like, yeah, I mean, they're having him cut all this stuff like every so often, presumably, unless they, and also the part where it's like, no, don't water the scissors, they'll rust, or get some oil, or WD-40, whatever it was called, and let's see, yeah. um Yeah, Helen also wasn't too terribly, the part where he's still standing there looking towards Kim, and then Helen's like, we're here, like that wasn't quite as harsh as with Joyce. Um, but yeah, it really bugs me that, because like that's one of the big turning points. I forget which of them, but one of them says, well, he practically raped Joyce, so that's when they turn on him. Moving on. Once again, data mail is where the numbers are gone into. Yes, the let's see. Um, what was the other thing? I guess. Yes. So yeah. When Helen takes him back after that, he unlocks the door, and Kim is just like, oh, thank goodness we can, now we're not stranded here. We can go inside. But her then boyfriend, later ex, immediately sees, oh, we could steal stuff like this. She sees that, oh, because like he likes her, she likes him, and he did something nice for her. There should be more of that in the world. But all that her boyfriend can see is someone to take advantage of. And yeah, really, really chillingly accurate portrait of way too much of like middle and upper class, perhaps especially like young and teenagers and such. I think that does pretty much. I guess that does get us to the actual yeah, burglary. And yeah, that's also, it's a great costume change with his, the way that they make him look for the burglary, for the break-in. And yeah, just genuinely so messed up when, the thing locks behind, and he just walks away and carries Kim away, and they refuse to turn the car around. And I did appreciate the thing about, like, would your dad really prosecute his own kid? He'd especially prosecute his own kid. I do believe him, but I mean, you were robbing him. You don't, your case is not as strong as you think it is right now. And I think, yeah, the part where he, so the cops disable the alarm, and so he walks out, and they almost shoot him because they think, and thankfully some of the neighbors come around, no, don't, and so they handcuff him. And I do really appreciate, he actually does, I'm afraid I didn't catch his name, but the cop keeps actually worrying about him, for the rest of the movie. Each time he encounters Edward, he empathizes. He's like, is Edward going to be okay out there? And the doctor's like, I don't know, sure. And he's like, please take care of yourself. You're going to give me sleepless nights. And then later, he's, he refuses to shoot him and says, oh, well, it's settled. And that I will also say, so if we are reading him as minority coded in some way, including, having some perhaps a mental illness or something, this thing of like a Karen calls the cops and it could have gone really badly. That is also something that is important to criticize. I forget if that's a thing where it's more common for it to be women than men or not. I genuinely don't remember, but I am aware. There's a term for it. White women weaponizing their tears, and for example, there are some black people who had the cops called on them, and sometimes it ended really badly, and that is an actual problem. And I think that does, I appreciate the fact that he doesn't, Edward doesn't tell them why it was that he did. And the thing about like television, am I right? And it's like, that is exactly the kind of thing a suburbanite would say, it must be television. At least they do also acknowledge, oh, maybe somebody put him up to it, And let's see, I think, does that pretty much get us to the, right, and it was also very compelling observation when the doctor says, well, I mean, you see how creative he is? I don't think he really understands what reality is. And it's like, those two things do not follow. But that is the thing, that there are, mental health care professionals who have asserted, and I'm sure some of them actually believe it, but, and I'm not saying it's never, there are cases where there can be a correlation, but like, it seems more like, well, I mean, he's shy and he's not super communicative about this whole burglary thing, but there's maybe another reason for that. Like the people who've had conversations with him would tell you, no, he understands, like there's just, I thought it worked well. The thing about the dinner table, I'm like, well, I'm gonna have to teach you ethics, which, we see in a flashback. Well, that was attempted once before, and he didn't super vibe with it. And then we see one of the reasons why he is so lonely and struggles to connect with other people. He used to get poetry read to him by Vincent Price, and then after a while no longer. Like, who amongst us would not take a turn for the worse? Like, anyway, the thing about, let's imagine you're walking down the street, you see a bag of money, and he says, I'd give the money to my loved ones. And the Arkin character is genuinely frustrated because, like, that's not what the rules say. And Kevin outright insults him, for getting the answer wrong. And then Kim is like, but that's the kind thing, though. And then we get the golden line. Kim, we're talking about right and wrong, not about what's kind. That's a very telling way to phrase that. There are a number of capitalists who would say, well, no, I mean, you can't just give, no, but that money doesn't belong to you or your loved ones, so it doesn't matter if it would do them a lot of good and the Like, if it was a rich person who lost a lot, like, the richest people have to lose so much money before they would even notice it. And I think, I guess that pretty much gets us to the, so yeah, he goes, let's see, he goes home and he's cutting up he's cutting the walls and such, and you have that thing about, well, we'll think of something you can do to repay, because with the Arkan character, it is always about money, trying to teach responsibility, But, I did appreciate, he says, it's gonna take a while before we can trust you again. He could have said so much worse. And, considering that he doesn't know, like, because Edward still isn't saying why he broke in. So I thought they did a good job there. Like, he could easily have said, listen, I'm sorry, this is too much. You're going to have to go back to the castle. Like, keeping in mind, they wouldn't technically be, like, he lived up there for a long time by himself. It's not a death sentence. It would mean he would be lonely again. And he is actually like, okay, I don't want you to be lonely. So we're gonna find some way for this to be okay again, That I did really appreciate. And I think that pretty much brings us to the there's definitely at least one more thing. Let me think. So the the way that so Kim breaks up with her boyfriend because she's bored and sends him away, and he blames Edward, and then he's like getting drunk and talking about like, he would hurt her. Would he, or are you just struggling to acknowledge that you hurt her and don't even actually seem that upset by it, and that again, such an important message about bigotry, because it's happened so many times. There's so many who, like, I forget, was it maybe Jordan Klepper, who went to like a Trump rally, and and a Trump supporter said something like, we can't have Muslims in America because we respect women. And then Klepper just points to his shirt and says, can you read me what's on your shirt? And then, the guy reads it aloud and doesn't even realize that shirt is super disrespectful. I am not going to quote it here. That shirt is super disrespectful to women. It's just something they say because then they feel like the good guy. They don't want to be like looking around themselves and go, are we the baddies? Like, I have met my share of Muslim immigrants here to the West. I've met my share of white conservative Christians here in the West. I can tell you right now, a lot of the white conservatives are way more misogynistic and like, I think I talk about it too often. So we're gonna move on. I've made my point. Yeah, the let's see. What is left? I guess so there's the thing about, so still a Christmas party? Yeah, still a Christmas party. And, there we again see this kind of misogynistic thing of like several of them lied to Peg instead of just having a conversation with her. And that again it's one of those things. There are a lot of cishet men who will lie to women and then get mad at the woman for being able to tell that he's lying to her and wanting the truth. And so, some of the sometimes we'll get stuff like this. So to be clear, I don't know exactly if, I mean, let's see. Burton is credited as writing the story, so I can imagine it was his idea that they turn on her and don't even tell her the truth. Because like in real life, I'm not saying always, but a lot of the time women, especially if they're like friends, if they care about each other, they'll have a conversation. You know, it might not be 100% pleasant, but a lot of the time they're much better at talking things out than so many men. You know, there's a lot of men, if they have a problem with someone, they might threaten or even use violence. They might just ignore them for a really long time, but they might never just go to the person and say, hey, this thing is bothering me. And so it just frustrates me to see yeah. So a couple of things about the religious neighbor. I guess I'll briefly note. So I said, you know, women who care about each other. I suppose it's possible that these women don't really care about each other. And again, decent point about like neighbors in the suburbs. There are a lot of them who will like pretend they like each other, but they don't really. And if they use the male characters more for that, instead of making it all about the women characters, I think it would, you know, I don't think it had to be, or at least come across so misogynistic. But yeah, so the religious, you know, basically everyone dislikes her, and you know, they only start listening to her after, I guess it's the burglary, yeah, and considering that there was a time where quite a lot of women were raped, tortured, and murdered by misogynistic men, justified in the minds of these men by religion, including conservative Christianity, it feels really weird to have this character in this movie be a woman instead of a man. That really feels like it should have been, yeah. You wouldn't even have to change very much about. Uh, you know what? One of the things you would, for example, gain is if every so often when the women are talking about how much they like Edward, if then the religious person shows up and is a man and is like hassling these women about how they don't follow his religion enough and making them really uncomfortable, much more so than Edward, that would work a lot better. But again, it just feels like the movie is saying that if a woman is very religious, she's going to be really harmful to, again, perfect victim Edward. Like, he makes almost no mistakes in the entire movie. Like, obviously, it would be great if he wasn't, like, slicing up wallpaper on purpose, I mean. And, you know, the entire last chunk where he is scaring people, you know, we understand why he got there, but yeah, that's moving on. Yeah, that really felt like that should have been a male character. It feels so awkward that like the men are kind of just standing off to the side, kind of like, oh well, as a woman is trying to use her religion, her conservative Christianity, to persecute a perfect victim, when in reality it's more like the other way around. I'm not saying that women, that there are, I'm 100% aware, there are women who perpetuate patriarchy and misogyny, and I get wanting to discuss that, but then you also have to note that it does start with men being, you know, like, yeah. I think that might pretty much get us to the last little chunk of movie. Yeah, let's see. I thought it worked really well. That, you know, when so Edward is going around, he's cutting up, you know, these bushes. I guess maybe he feels like at this point he can cut them any way he wants. And yeah, at one point a dog walks up and he like lifts his sister and like for I appreciate that they don't milk it to a point where it gets to be like exploitative, but they also do let us really think, no, he's not, and thankfully he doesn't. He just removes the hair from in front of the eyes of the dog. That was all he was going to do. The only time he purposefully hurts another living being is self-defense against Kim's ex, and also to protect her. And I guess that does get us to... Yeah, so yeah, and he, sends Edward away, and I thought they handled it right, the way that Arkin is up there. He's either singing or humming like this Christmas song. He's like setting up the Christmas decorations on the house, and then he sees Edward rushing off, and he himself fairly quickly gets down the ladder and then says, I'm afraid I didn't see what he was walking off in that direction, but he was so fast, like it's not like he can jump off the roof or something, like that's not gonna... And they do go out and try to find him, and the person who turns out to be dangerous to Kevin is Kim's ex and the friend. The thing, you really want me, driving after you've had me drinking? And he very nearly ran him over. And then, Edward accidentally like cut some of his face, but that we're told afterwards, no, he was mostly just scared, And that's also the thing, like when he's like crying out, ow, that might be like the weight of Edward on him more than like constantly being cut in the face. But to the onlookers, it looks like he's attacking him. And let's see. Every so often someone in this suburb does have a nightmare about someone who's got, knife fingers, so gotta be careful. And I think it pretty much gets us. So he runs off, and you have the part where the cop drives after, and fires his gun in the air. And that was also great, the fact that we don't immediately see that he's purposefully missing. We just hear gunshots, and it's like, oh no, and she Kim runs up, and then we see he was just firing into the air, and then he turns around, and only now can these housewives see him, so they didn't see that he wasn't shooting. And he says something like, just stay up there, son, or something like that. And I do also appreciate that, the fact that the most prominent black character in the movie does have tremendous empathy towards this. Like as soon as he recognizes Edward's humanity, which it was only the Scissorhands that was throwing him off at first. As soon as he recognizes that, he spends the rest of the movie trying his best to keep him safe. And that did also feel like, I want to say the term is color conscious casting, because like hypothetically, could that have been a white cop? Sure, but it is a well-known, well-documented fact. I'm not saying universally 100% of the time, but there are a number of African Americans who are very careful to help minorities. Obviously one such being other African Americans, but also other ethnicities and such, because they appreciate how awful it is to be persecuted. But yeah, and that is a really the housewives functioning as the torch and pitchfork wielding angry mob storming the castle to kill the monster. That worked well. So Kim finds him up there, and we have a line about something like, I thought, I worried you were dead. And then, in steps, and the ex is there, I didn't. Yeah, genuinely very, very tense. And yeah, the fact that, like, no matter how much she says she does not want this, she wants him to leave and stop attacking Edward. Like, at one point he kicks her off him because she's trying to physically restrain him. Yeah, like it's very clear he doesn't actually love her. He just wants to possess her. And that is, like, for so many sexual predators, that's what it is. And I'm not saying that they needed to also make this character a sexual predator. I suppose part of what I'm saying is they didn't really need to have Joyce, or anyone else for that matter, be a sexual predator. Like, it's enough to just have, it's never outright said, but that's what's going on with this character. Like, if, like, he just said, "Ugh, I mean, Edward could definitely hurt her." Well, now you're kicking her, you're hurting her. She's saying she is okay. You can, like, yeah. Um, right, and we also have the thing about, there was this accidental slice of the hand, and then, Peg helps deal with Kim's hand wound, and then she's like, so much blood from such a little cut. Very effective that it's not said immediately that it's just a small cut, so we feel like the tension of it, but afterwards it is, yeah, it was a tiny little accident, and I guess I'll just briefly note, it's so sweet and so heartbreaking when they do, yeah, we have the hug where he's like, I can't hug you, with the scissor hands, and she makes sure that they can hug, and he remembers, the hands and the heart attack, and then, saying I love you, and the kiss, it's just so sweet. Just, I think that does pretty much cover the entire movie. Yeah. Um, yeah, and the line about, sometimes you'll still catch me dancing in the snow. And yeah, the fact that, for the rest of her life, he kept, he never forgot her, and he kept making snow for her. That they were both thinking about the other, even if they couldn't be together. And yeah, there is something special about snow. I haven't even seen much of it in the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years because of climate change. Used to have lots of snow around here on Christmas. I think that does cover everything. Okay, so I am just very briefly mentally gonna fast forward through the entire movie to see if there is anything else that I really needed to say, and I don't think there really is. Very clever, the thing about, she's like, they killed each other. The roof caved in on, because, like, I I believe they can see from there. Yeah, they're, and they might have also heard some of the roof caving in because they were fairly close. Yeah, and, she holds up the hand that she grabbed from the lab and says, "See, he's dead, Jim." And yeah, I think that does cover. I feel like there's just one more thing. Let me real quick go over. So let's see. So I talked about the issue of the way the movie deals with ethnicity, with neurodivergence, the misogyny, the commentary on suburbia, on capitalism. Yeah, that might be all of it. Yeah, I think that is it. So, yeah, just did I want to mention the let's see. I mean, I am willing to acknowledge. So I've said my piece about the scene where Kim finds him in the bed. Him poking a bunch of holes in the waterbed and the water, that was genuinely well handled. And it's one of those things where you got to be careful not to push it too far because it can get to be like, okay, come on now. But I thought they handled that just right. And also just the way that, every so often we'll see him cutting a hedge or making an ice sculpture, that sort of thing. And we see, little pieces of debris, go flying off as he's doing that. And like, obviously in real life, they just set up like a thing that would keep spraying that. And so he just has to stand there and act like he really is doing it right now. And so it going flying off like that. It has this stylized thing where it doesn't necessarily feel like that's what it would look like in the real world if that exact same thing was happening. But it also really has like an impact. Yeah, I think that might cover the entire thing. So yeah. Yeah. It's I forget if I've mentioned already, but it's a movie I've watched a bunch of times, probably over a dozen. It's just been a lot of years since last time, and yeah, keep discovering new things to, really fall in love with in it, and yeah, it gets a lot out of the so Winona Ryder, when it's not every performance of hers, but in this and some of her other work, yeah, like a lot of people are gonna, see her character and either really identify with her or identify with Edward wanting to like do things for her, And I do also think that is like he never pushes her. He clearly is smitten, but he's not trying to, yeah. And that stands in such stark contrast to her ex. He wants to do things for her, to protect her, and for her to be happy, whether that's with or without him. And that is one of those things that there's a lot of people who can watch something like this and, those are some really positive values to take away, to emulate. And you don't have to be a man for that to be, the case. It's just, yeah, if you care about someone, it's really great to do things to try to make them happy.